sure you're recording.
Okay. Oh, you mean you want my pocket?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure I did, but I just want to make sure.
1, 2, 3, testing, 1, 2, 3.
There we go. I'm glad I checked.
Okay, so I would have been mute.
You'd have been mute, but you would have been picked up on this thing.
Okay, so I've been mute before. Okay, so I'm shutting my phone off. Janice, you're in charge of phone.
No, I'm trying to put on Do Not Disturb.
Okay, so good idea. And if anybody wants to shut their phone off, that'd be great.
Sorry, if I get a spam
you
call, it'll shut it off by itself. It'll shut up the recording, so I'm gonna go.
Yeah,
We're recording.
All right.
we're ready?
Yeah, we're ready.
Okay, voice and volume, good.
Yeah, we should be fine.
Want to say something?
Good
So-
morning.
So good morning, how are you?
Good afternoon. How are you?
I'm good, thank you very much. Good?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay, cool. So, okay. So this is our recording of Monica Esparza.
Esparza.
Esparza,
Esparza.
thank you. And today's date is August 12th, 2024. Individuals that are present are Monica Esparza, Chad Wallerton, Theodore Holmes, Janice Allen, and myself, James Verjant. I want to thank you for being here today. As you have heard in our previous meetings that we've had, this is a recording of oral history so that we can perhaps capture some of the untold and undertold stories of our American historical narrative. If you could you please introduce yourself and let us know your full name and your date of birth?
My full name is Monica Marie Esparza. My date of birth is March 27, 1962. I currently serve in the capacity of the trustee for the Image Church Renewal of Life Land Trust. We've been around for about 34 years, basically a ministry for land stewardship. And see, my professional background includes working as a civil rights marketing manager, sustainability manager, worked for some time with state parks, and a teacher. And I was a teacher, so a number of capacities.
Okay, so part of that will come into some of my questioning also, so it might be a little bit more redundant, but if you think of something that else you'd like to add. Were you born in Richmond?
No, I was born in New York City.
In New York City?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have anything in particular, like a part of New York City that you...
I was born at Columbia University Hospital on the Hudson River, but I spent the majority of my time in New York as a youth in Brooklyn and in Harlem.
How did you come to live in Richmond, Virginia?
My father loved the rivers, and so the James River was a great attraction to him, and we wound up moving to Richmond.
And when was that move?
1973.
Could you share with us some of your thoughts about growing up as an African American young person in the United States of America?
Well, growing up in the United States, in Brooklyn and New York, was a fantastic experience. A world of diversity, a world very different than Virginia. So moving to Virginia was kind of a culture shock, where I would walk down the street and be called a Nanny Picken and be told to go back to Africa. And the just the whole cultural nuances were very different, and so it required a big adjustment on my part. On the flip side, I went to an all African American high school, Armstrong High School, which is one of the first in the nation, had a very long, distinguished history, and so it opened up a whole new world. So, for example, I got to be in a marching band. We don't have those things in the city. Okay, we probably do, but not quite like the South. So football games and marching bands and cheerleading, all those things I was exposed to, and it was wonderful. As well as green spaces. Virginia's a very green city slash town slash country, if you want to call it that.
So clearly you're an Armstrong person, and do you have any comments about the Armstrong-Maggie Walker rivalry?
Armstrong Wildcats, I am and will always be. I was in the last graduating class of the Armstrong Wildcats.
As an African American, can you share with us some of how you believe the United States has changed over the course of your life?
I used to think it had changed, but the older I get, the more I realize things are very much the same as they were. That our social order is cyclical, and so here we are at the turn of the century, experiencing some of the same things that our ancestors did.
What are some of the things you would like to see change?
I would like to see our country do away with the race focus, with the focus on race. It has been, of course, very beneficial in the realm of civil rights to understand slices of the pie, so to speak. But in the overall context of things, the construct of race, I think, has been very destructive to humanity, and that's one thing I would like to change. Let's do away with it.
Amen. Do you have any recollections of a time when Jim Crow segregation was a part of your life or a part of your family's life?
Growing up in New York, I would say no. As a young person, however, I was very much informed about it. And one exhibit that was very impactful to me as a youth was Harlem on My Mind. It was an exhibit, I believe, that was at the Schomburg Museum at the time. Or maybe a New York library, I'm not sure. But it was an exhibit highlighting the surviving prisoners of war. And it was just drove me to want to understand more about our experiences in that light. And so there began my quest, and I must have been about 6 years old at the time.
So at the time of being 6 or thereafter, you were recognizing that there were differences that were obviously unfair. Could you share with us some of your maybe mom and dad's names and their experiences that you can relate?
Well, my parents were from Harlem, and Harlem was a different place than a lot of the other parts of the country. It was unique, and it was just like, they call Jackson Ward 2 Street the Harlem of the South because of its progressive nature, because of its strength and empowerment in terms of self-sufficiency, the growth of capitalism and economic development, and that's the grain of stock, so to speak, that I was exposed to growing up. So indeed, there were experiences that we had that may have been contrary to our liking. I can share that I surmise, just through research, nobody ever said it, but I surmised that in my family, they relocated from the South to the North because of some experience they didn't want to talk about anymore. And so I gleaned that as a lesson from them also. Sometimes, we talk about trauma and, and they need to get it out. But at the same time, our ancestors did a pretty good job of leaving it to the past.
When did the migration of your folks happen from, you said South Carolina?
No, I said the South.
The South.
Mm-hmm.
And where in the South were they from?
Virginia and South Carolina.
And South Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
And what years approximately do you remember or recall someone saying that they moved from the South to New York?
They were probably in the 30s.
In the 30s.
Mm-hmm.
And so routes out of South Carolina at the time were either a bus or a train or a car. And do you recall any stories about how they traveled?
No,
No. Are you familiar with the Great Migration?
I am.
Do you have any family members outside of your own family who participated in the Great Migration that may have talked about it?
Well, everybody who migrated from the south to the north participated in that great migration, but they didn't, speak of it in those terms. They mostly just retained their culture, and and talked about their culture, talked about the past. What I remember the most from my family was that we were not slaves. We were not enslaved people. That's one thing that I remember. So.
Thank you. Have you or your family ever experienced redlining when it came to looking for housing or anything of that nature?
No, but I heard a lot about it.
What year did you come to Richmond?
1973.
And you mentioned that your father came here for rivers?
He was a avid fisherman, avid naturalist, I should say. And so he enjoyed spending a lot of time on the river and taking us on the river. He did that even in New York. Many people think of New York as the concrete jungle, but it in fact has one of the best park systems probably in the country. A lot of waterways, there's rivers, there's the beach. So we grew up around those elements, and they were here as well as, and as well as work. He was a realtor contractor, so we also spent a lot of time in those disciplinaries.
So you mentioned that Richmond is the Harlem of the South, and I thought I heard a tone of affection when you said that. So could you explain that a little deeper?
Anything named Harlem of the South, anything named Harlem has an affection. Just because it was a center for entertainment, economic, and commercial growth, and that's what Harlem really, a place of cultural strength, I would say. And so I appreciate that about Jackson Ward. It was central, it was African American, it was a legacy of success in keeping the community together and being self-sufficient. So I admire and respect those things.
Do you ever hear of a man named Roland J. Duke Ealey?
I recently have heard about Mr. Ealey, Dr. Ealey.
And what do you know about him?
I know that he was a civil rights attorney, that he was very widely respected and was the gentleman, made it to represent, I don't know if it was Richmond, but a district of Richmond in the General Assembly. I know that he was widely revered, a mentor, so to speak, to many of the civil rights attorneys that we know today, such as Doug Wilder, and others, I'm pretty sure.
Were
And
you
that-
your? Oh, I'm sorry.
And that he was a resident of Jackson Ward.
And he was a resident of Jackson Ward. That's correct. And he did work quite a bit with many of the icons of our civil rights movement. Were you or your family member ever involved in the civil rights movement?
I would say yes. Civil rights movement was a little bit before my time, actually. But I've had the privilege to carry whatever I learned about it forward. My people participated in the March on Washington. I participated in the 50th anniversary of the March on Washington. And we just, again, being from one of the cultural capitals of the world, have always participated and engaged in or talked about things that were happening in the civil rights realm. So, for example, I would hear stories as a youngster about Malcolm X's soapbox speeches. That people attended, communicating messages about those. We would be hearing about parades and things that happened in Harlem when Haile Selassie, for example, the Emperor of Ethiopia, would come through Harlem. So it was a very lovely, experiential kind of civil rights participation. Nobody rode, not that I know of, nobody rode on a freedom ride or anything like that, but they were still always engaged.
Can you tell us a little bit about your educational background?
My educational background, again, high school, Armstrong High School in Richmond. I graduated from there and went to University of Maryland in College Park. Another wonderful experience. I chose that university because it was in between Richmond and New York. Wish I knew more about universities when I went there, because I finished, thankfully. I'm currently a graduate student at Virginia State University. You know, I've taken classes all my life. I'm a lifelong learner. If I could amass all the credits that I have taken in coursework, I would have a PhD, I'm sure. But the credits were too old, they wouldn't take, and so now I am pursuing a master's at Virginia State University, hopefully to graduate this fall.
Wonderful. Could you elaborate more about your work history?
My work history has been pretty varied. Thankfully, I have had the opportunity to work independently, something that my father always encouraged as a business entrepreneur. So, for example, the Renewal of Life Trust has always kind of been a side interest. And then professionally, when I graduated from the University of Maryland, I worked for NASA for a short time. I happened to be there when the Challenger met its unfortunate fate. That prompted me to apply for employment with Air Atlanta, which was the nation's first African-American airline that I worked for several years out of Atlanta. Moved back to Washington, D.C. After that experience. And let's see, in Washington, D.C., what did I do? I worked a lot for temp agencies, which was also a very wonderful experience. Because you got to go around and see different businesses, different operations, different locations of the city, and so I've always kind of leaned to work that was not too binding, except when I needed to work full time and raise children. And so I spent a lot of years working for the Virginia Department of Transportation. It was actually the nation's either second or third largest agency in the country. Was the state's largest budget at the time, and the work that I did there was as a civil rights marketing manager. So in that sense, the work entailed making sure that businesses had access to procurement and contracting opportunities. Before that, I think I worked for State Parks, Department of Conservation and Recreation for some time, Supreme Court of Virginia for some time, Virginia State most recently, Department of Engineering.
So earlier on, you mentioned that they didn't necessarily treat you or speak to you in a nice way when you arrived in Richmond. How did that make you feel?
Empowered, I must say, probably, because we came from a place that didn't tolerate that kind of stuff, so we weren't going to allow it to affect us negatively, except to address it as best we could.
Are you aware that Mr. Ealey has a lot of deeds of trust that may relate to the federal interstate highway project that resulted in family displacement of many people in Jackson Ward and throughout the country, but in particular Jackson Ward?
I am familiar with that and had a significant interest in it.
So explain your interest in the deeds of trust.
Well, again, my work around the Renewal of Life Land Trust had to do with the preservation of land and land stewardship. And so that entails a plethora of things, heirs property, estate planning, but more specifically, how people lose their land and how they have opportunities to retain their land. And so working with the Department of Transportation especially, and learning about the long and unfortunate displacement of communities around the country as a result of transportation projects was always an interest. So recently, as a through work that I've been doing with the Hickory Hill, with the historic Hickory Hill School project, that is a location that also had a highway. So it wasn't a highway; it was more like a beltway come through. But I'm also interested in the land records around that project in Southside. But specifically, I have been engaged with, or historically, through work that I did at the African Burial Grounds, for example, raising the awareness of property displacement, specifically related to the African Burial Ground as well. As you know, that's over 45 acres that were adjacent to Navy Hill. And so I know that there were a number of residents and churches that were displaced from that project. One of those churches, and I can't remember the name of it now, but they're located on Fairmount Avenue. We used to have a relationship with them about that displacement.
Do you have any interest or other comments regarding these deeds of trust, whether it's on the south side with the Hickory Hill School or with the Navy Hill project? Clearly, it's part of the Devil's Half Acre aspect of that area. So could you share some additional thoughts on that?
Well, not really, because have not done I've not researched deeds specifically related to that. So I have a general knowledge, but not a specific knowledge.
So you mentioned in your interview contact sheet that you were interested in discussing voter information. Could you share some things that are of interest to you regarding that voter information?
I was interested in the Ealey project because of his work with voters or voter registration or voter rights. I look forward more to find out more clarification about those. But the work that I do with the Hickory Hill Preservation Committee brought us to understand that one of the key principals of that school, who was James P. Spencer, was a founder of the Virginia Voters League. And so as the founder of the Virginia Voters League, obviously there was a great interest for voter participation in the districts. Currently, Hickory Hill School is one of the largest voting precincts in the city. And so there is a wonderful tie, some kind of way, that we're still trying to figure out about voter registration in the past and voter registration presently.
With your interest in the voter information, are you familiar with the Crusade for Voters campaign?
I am vaguely familiar.
Have you ever heard of the Richmond 34?
Is that the group out of Virginia Union that sat at the Woolworth lunch counter?
Telheimers?
Tallheim's counter. Okay. I'm familiar, vaguely familiar with them.
Yeah, okay, vaguely. Okay, good.
Yeah.
Are there any additional topics you'd like to talk about of being in the South as an African American woman?
Well, one of the things that I'll talk about is an entrepreneurial venture that me and my husband had at, I just can't remember the exact address, but I think it's 400 North 1st Street. Same street as, across the street from Consolidated Bank. What's that, 1st Street? 1st Street.
Yes.
1st Street. So the venture was called Caribbean Beat. It was a store for African and Caribbean music. We also sold things like t-shirts and hats and paraphernalia, books, and I did say music, right? Records, cassette records at the time, and albums we started off with. So it was a wonderful cultural center for the time. This was before the Black History Museum opened.
Quick question. The bookstore, where was that located? Do you remember?
400 North 1st Street, I think. That was on 1st Street.
The bookstore that you were talking about? Okay.
Oh, One Forest Books, they were located on Clay Street, I think.
Okay.
In Jackson Ward?
Yeah.
Could you pause? So, where do you live now?
I live in Southside Richmond, mere feet from the Hickory Hill School, presently Hickory Hill Community Center.
Have you experienced anything in Richmond that makes you believe that there are positive changes taking place here in the current decade, let's say?
Wrong time frame. Let's go.
Okay.
To me, there might have been some before that.
Well, okay, here's a positive.
Not just looking for positives.
That's
I'm looking for your feelings.
Yeah, well, here's an example of my feelings. There have been wonderful cultural activity in the city, so I can say that that's very encouraging. You know what else is very encouraging? To see young people get involved and carry forward much of the legacy, like the work that's being done in Jackson Ward. I think that's very encouraging. And so, on the flip side, I know there's a lot of plans. One of the things that Richmond does is plan for things that really shouldn't take long. For example, planning at the African Burial Grounds, to see what, when it was rediscovered, so to speak, and to see the depth of time and commitment and resources that people have put into that project. I would like to see much more come to bear soon.
Oh, sorry. I'll cut that part.
So you flew through all my questions. I just gotta get through this. And I'm not sure how much further, like the back of my sheet. I hit all of her. I mean, your deeds of
You
trust.
could have gave me some more, if I had known, I probably could have gave some more.
Who? Should this be recorded?
Yeah,
Just let me know.
Yeah, right.
I was speaking about the store and the different cultural things. I just didn't mention Brown, but I did talk about it. Yeah, and I talked about the Black History Museum. I didn't mention it. But I sit in a minute and think about this. What else could we talk about?
Let me know when you want to do.
Yeah, I'm not sure, because I'm at a loss as to where to go. Because there's many things that,
When you all first moved here, was it just Southside, or did you live in Jackson?
No,
Just
we
Southside.
moved to Southside. Yeah. Same location. Yeah, we can talk about that in busing and let's talk about that.
Yeah, so I was gonna go all there, okay? So, I actually have that.
I'm on.
Yeah, you're on?
Recording.
Okay. So,
well, I can just jump into it. I used to live at, if that's okay. Is that okay?
is where?
I said, can I just jump into it? Is that
You
okay?
could just fire on all
Okay.
cylinders if you like. That would be good with me.
Okay, so the family moved to Richmond, to a location in a community called Dearborn in South Richmond. Dearborn is a bedroom community that we loved at the time. It had a creek running through the back. You know, imagine city girls were moving down to the south, and it has a creek running in the back of it, and there's woods everywhere. And we're playing and finding deer skulls and playing with the tadpoles in the creek. You know, it had life back then. Things have changed, but one of the nuances about living in that community is that we had to be bused all the way from Southside all the way to Church Hill to attend school, as many students did due to the segregation legislation. And so that was an experience in itself. But I recall also having to be bused to school in New York, so it wasn't exactly new. One of the things that was different here versus growing up in New York is that transportation was very limited. So we had to walk everywhere that we went, and being in Southside at that time, actually still now, there's very limited sidewalks, unfortunately. And coming downtown was a treat because there were sidewalks. Much of the infrastructure has suffered. A lot of city officials call it neglect, and it was neglect, but also recall that district of the city, a part of the city, was annexed to the city of Richmond in 1970. And so there was a whole cultural nuance, because many of the people who resided in that district left as a result of the annexation. So there was a whole transformation from the community being all of European descent to all African American descent. Those specific neighborhoods anyway. Some of the communities were traditionally indigenous and African people. The people who surrounded Hickory Hill School. So as I think about it now, the area was being gentrified. And we find that today it is continually being gentrified. In other words, housing brought in that the community has not requested or does not desire. And so in this gentrification, significant acres of trees are being demolished right now. I think there's a project that just went on 60 acres of trees. Southside is not that big. 60 acres of trees gone for housing development. That was very unfortunate, right? Very close to Brindle Key. And why this is also significantly important is because the area is environmentally challenged. So whereas before, used to come from downtown over to Southside, and we could almost feel like the air conditioning immediately because of the tree canopy. It was cooler. It was, the air was fresher. Today, that's a different story, especially because we're so close to industry. We have Philip Morris, DuPont, Georgia Paper. I think it's a paper company. I forget which one. But they're all located in Southside too, and so they have also grown over time. So we've unfortunately lost a lot of land to rezoning, as well as industrial growth. And so there is a lot of interest in citizens in that area to keep as much green space as we can for our health and wealth.
So you mentioned that you were bused from the south side all the way to Church Hill. Was it a segregated bus or was it a integrated bus?
It was predominantly African American, but of course there were other families. Southside's always been diverse. There's always been black and white. So the bus had both, but it was predominantly African American. Same thing that, the participants of the school was predominantly African American, but of course there were also indigenous and African and Europeans, and so there's a variety.
So there was many connections between the African American community and the indigenous peoples of the nations in the early days and even to today. Are any of your ancestors integrated into those two communities?
Yes, they're all of them.
Could you mention some of that?
Well, Morris Scott was an indigenous man, and my father was also an indigenous man.
Do you remember what tribe?
I'm probably Cherokee, but not positive.
Other relatives?
All I can say is that the strong message that I got from my ancestors was we were not enslaved. And so I can only surmise that there was a lot of intermingling, and here we are. Unfortunately, not everybody can trace their ancestors back to 1300s. So, we have done a lot of significant work in tracing our genealogy, but there definitely could be more to refine, like you said, what tribes we may have came from.
So how far back does your ancestry go?
Documented, probably the late 1700s.
Was most of the relations that were in your lineage from the South?
Yes.
And whereabouts were most of those families or tribes located?
Some were located in Farmville, Virginia, Cumberland County, and others were from a place called St. John's Island in South Carolina.
You tell me, but.
So you're gonna pause,
Sure.
just save time, battery.
We're off it.
What time do you have? Are there any more questions? I just don't know where to go. I'm sorry.
Oh, you're good. You're good. Yeah,
I mean, I spent 2 days trying to figure out questions. I got them all, and then you rattled them all off. It's like, I don't know anything about that. No thanks, I haven't touched that. I'm gonna just rattle some things off, and then I'll check them, and maybe we can talk a little about that. Harry Flood, not yet. Harry Flood bird. Don't know anything about it. Okay. Massive resistance, bird machine. Nothing. Poll tax litigations and stuff like that. Care to talk about Brown versus Board of Education? No. Okay. That's right. This
Put
is
a
what's.
question mark by this.
So we talked about desegregations of public schools a little bit. Do you want to go there at all? No. Okay. Have you ever heard of the case called Martinsville 7?
Martinsville 7. Not enough to talk about it.
Can you talk about generational wealth and generational wealth loss? Generational wealth loss is basically like someone taking you home and all that kind of stuff. So
Yeah. You can put a question mark by that one.
I can do that one? Like, okay, so I'm just gonna check that one off. You wanna talk more about the Confederate South? No? Okay, okay.
Sorry.
Do you wanna talk about how you feel about the American storyline?
What do you mean by the American
What I mean by that is, do you believe that that it's real, that it's true, that it's honest, that there are many stories that are left out? Which stories do you believe? Which ones do you think are full of baloney? Those kinds of questions. Just throwing it out there. I'm gonna leave that as a question mark at best. I really am like at a loss to go where to go.
One question.
Yeah, I hope you have 100.
No, you may have already answered it. I'm trying to just get it in my head. You came from Harlem, right? You got here around 8 or 9? How old were you?
Brooklyn, 11.
11.
11, okay, so that's 5th grade, right? So you'd already been in school though, right? Were the schools integrated in New York?
Yeah.
So
Well,
you-
I said because they were bused. We also were bused.
Because the first kind of segregated school you went to was Armstrong?
And it wasn't supposed to be segregated because we were bused.
Bus to
So it wasn't supposed to be segregated because we were bused.
Bus, right, but the
See,
whole-
so like the lines were drawn to segregate, but by that time, folks had moved out, so it didn't, you know, the program didn't really work. 76,
Sure.
So you were coming out.
It's gonna be a lot of random stuff that you're gonna have to pick up on, that's okay.
76 I was going into Armstrong.
They were integrated in 76.
Yeah,
Fully integrated.
yeah, supposedly.
But I'm saying the Armstrong experience probably wasn't.
Yes, it was.
Was it Armstrong?
Maggie Walker was integrated my senior year.
Well, it was segregated, it was a segregated experience, but just because it says segregated on paper doesn't mean it was. No, wait a minute. You're saying
He said it's an integrated.
it was an integrated experience, yeah. I said because it was an integrated experience on paper, doesn't mean it was really an integrated experience. I mean, it was, you know what I mean? We had, you know, but it was still predominantly African
Is
American.
that your experience?
I'm not understanding.
Oh, I,
Yeah,
I'm
mine
following
too.
100%.
They drew the lines,
Yeah,
and
so-
it was
yeah.
supposed to be, and then people started moving,
Right,
so you ended up with,
Right.
you know, what they were trying to avoid.
right, yeah. You understand?
You get it, Theo? You don't get it? You don't see what you're saying?
Okay, so for example, the community that I lived in, Dearborn, was all white at the time. So they drew in to bus those students to Armstrong to make it a integrated school.
Right.
But by the time we got there, we lived in a community. We were African American going to a black school. So none of those white children who were supposed to be integrating Armstrong got to go. It was majority black.
So you're
They
saying,
had
I
other
could just go
options.
by
They
my
put other
experience.
options.
so the,
Just go by
so.
my
It was
experience.
integrated. We definitely had
My experience
integration.
was in my senior year, school was integrated finally after 12 years of massive resistance.
Mhm.
Said 1971,
Mhm.
it was, Maggie Walker was full of white people.
Mhm.
I'll put it that way.
Mhm.
That's my experience.
I didn't say we didn't have any.
Well, I'm just saying.
I just said it was. I don't think it, you know, met the.
And also
Criteria.
John Marshall.
And were we still doing the classics in your year?
Yeah,
We still
definitely.
doing that?
Yeah.
But in 76, I would think it was fully integrated. 76, I was in Germany.
Yeah, it was definitely fully integrated on paper. But I mean, you know, I think that also drove the interest for them to merge the schools ultimately.
Yeah.
It's another
Yeah, but
reconfiguration of the schools, you
Yeah,
know.
no, when I came back, it's like it was Marshall Walker, this, and then I came back to Germany, from Germany.
Yeah, I never
What?
understood, I'm glad you said that, I never understood why they did this, that's why they merged.
That's
I wasn't
the-
here,
So
so
that's something I haven't heard.
That's a
Thing
great-
we're talking about is that, so that, not, I wouldn't think it was completely, but Armstrong and Walker and a couple other schools got.
Armstrong and Kennedy,
Armstrong,
Walker,
Kennedy.
Walker and Thomas.
and, John Marshall.
John Marshall.
Okay,
That's why it's called Marshall Walker.
And Huguenot and who? Huguenot and Thomas Jefferson, was it? I don't remember all the schools, yeah. I don't remember the specific reasons that they gave except to consolidate resources, you know, something, you know, but I think it was a move for disempowerment because the Armstrong Walker Classic was a real economic generator. Something, you know,
Well-
things that only happen once a year. You know, the community came back in droves
Well,
for
they
that
ended
event.
that, yeah, they ended that, matter of fact, all the money, although the schools were segregated, the Maggie Walker Armstrong Football Classic gave a lot of money to, they made a lot of money, but the money went to the complete school system, the white schools as well. Although we couldn't play white teams, they got a piece of that money.
but you're also saying it's almost like a homecoming as well too, that people who had left the area would come back,
Oh, yeah.
bring in their money,
Mhm.
and so
Oh, yeah.
all the businesses got robbed of all
All
that.
the
That's
business.
traditional. I mean, we couldn't buy white and white and green ribbon or orange and blue ribbon in the city of Richmond. It's just sold out like that. You know, all stuff like that is sold out.
See, that's an interesting consequence you don't think about, right?
Yeah, think about, you know, the restaurant, ribbons, T-shirts, coats, the food that was sold at restaurants, the party venues that occurred.
Also the clothes, everybody got, this is a huge,
Clothes.
everybody wore the clothes.
Absolutely.
That's what it feels like.
Absolutely.
Awry.
What's that?
It feels like we're going awry.
When you going to rock?
I don't think so. I mean, no, because we're talking about,
Because you learning.
Yeah.
Next time you do it, you didn't.
right, exactly. I mean, we've talked about the Armstrong Walker rivalry a number of times, and well, I mean, I'm new to this, right? This is the first time I've heard about it being closed down and some of the consequences. So these are all related to the way neighborhoods are being shifted and you know, consolidating of schools. It sounds like a neighborhood, like management kind of thing. That's the reason they gave to it. But I got one reason that's very different, and then this other. This is really kind of cool, and I think it's very related in many ways.
Oh yeah, definitely relatable to Jackson Ward, because Jackson Ward was Maggie Walker hard. And I would
It all
was,
like businesses that those people came from.
We're in
all
Jackson
around
Ward.
that you know.
No,
Yeah.
exactly right. It's
Yeah, none of that would be possible if we didn't beat the Dragons enough.
Was it always football, or was there a little bit around basketball?
It's football.
Football.
It's primarily football.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I think a lot of
primarily.
football stadium back then.
Oh yeah. Well, and then see, it happened around Thanksgiving. So this was like the you know, you come back for family, and you come back for, you know, I mean, like the football game was nice, but then remember, you know, you have people in all aspects of the game, playing in the band and with cheerleading. You know, somebody, uncle, cousin, daughter, you know. They were in the parade because it was a parade also. So there was a plethora of activities that surrounded the classic. Like you said, that happened in Jackson Ward. It happened around Thanksgiving. So just like imagine as a store owner. So one of the things that I learned in the store that we had was that I could be open all year long, but I made most of my money 1 month of the year. And so it was the same thing with the Armstrong Walker Classic. You know, we stayed in touch and everything was good all over here, but at that one time of the year, which was Thanksgiving, that's when the community came together. And, you know, there was a sports rivalry, but it was really an opportunity for community growth, community development, and he said business. It was wonderful.
When did the quotes go away from the integration of school for you?
Well, you know, I worked as a teacher for a number of years, and I can say that maybe it hasn't gone away yet. I worked as a substitute teacher for many years. I talked earlier about my interest, the love for flexibility in my work schedule. So a lot of years I worked part-time, a lot of years I worked as a substitute teacher. So I would, you know, go around to all the schools. I had got opportunity to, you know, peek in and see what's going on in the classrooms and the schools. And the legislation has always been on the books. I've just been able to see nuances, you know, different schools, and, you know, all based on population. But like I said, I'd raise a question mark always.
Were there cultural activities that your family would participate in as it related to your indigenous backgrounds?
Cultural activities?
Yeah.
Always associated with land. That's the whole background. That's, you know, what drove not only my interest, but my father's interest in preserving land. I suspect that we, as a part of historical wealth loss,
Generational wealth?
generational wealth loss,
Development loss?
we're also displaced. And so, but, you know, the connection to the environment and nature was always primary and central in our upbringing and our family work. And that's, you know, an indigenous perspective that I carry today. And also on that point, I've had the opportunity, matter of fact, I wrote about it, the observation of the indigenous recognized tribes. And I have, delved a little bit into those, and I would just say that I think it is interesting that people who are able to trace their roots in a country that really did not preserve records for Africans or the indigenous, because oftentimes they're one and the same, depending on how far you go back into history. But those records have been lost, they've been burned, and the like. So, I'm part of that generation of people who, went back to scratch the surface, but not necessarily find anything specific related to family. But when you talk about the Great Migration, when you talk about general cultural movements, you find that the indigenous have always been here, that Africans have always been here, and that those cultures did not define race, as I spoke to earlier. And so the recognized tribes, the fact that they are able to, and I say they because I have not done the research, or do I have an interest really to do research to verify that I belong to this tribe or the other, because culturally speaking, and actually an indigenous elder did tell me this, that the government chooses who it wants to recognize, and other people they don't. So
There's a large number of unrecognized tribes throughout the country, and many of them know their history, and many of the recognized tribes also know their history. How do you think we could come to establish what those original nation divides or territories were about? Could it be through video recording of oral history of African Americans and Native Americans?
well, you may try, but there has been such a mistrust of government, of storytelling. As a media major, one of the things that I note about media is that they cover what they want to cover, when they want to cover it. I'm talking about major media. So for example, Hickory Hill School existed before 1856. What records are available? Nothing in the media. Nothing in the major media that I found about Hickory Hill School until annexation. And there might have been one story somewhere, right? But generally speaking, it was African American media that told the story about the Hickory Hill School, all the way from 1915, Tuskegee University, Negro yearbooks, on down the line. And so I say all of that to answer your question, that there has been an indigenous movement to go underground, to stay out of the limelight because of the tragic and unfortunate events that occurred. And so those wounds may not have healed enough for people to really talk about or even want to participate in the kind of work that you mentioned.
So if the trust was present, which it seriously is, a private effort to remove government from the recordings of oral history, so that we can have those private historical accounts, whether they are documented on hides or in written texts of indigenous peoples and African American peoples, and bypass the lack of trust you have for the government, or not you, in general. Would that be a way to create a platform that allows for zero interference from federal and state governments and recognize uncertified good communities?
One of the things that I've come to understand about indigenous culture, which I honor and respect, is that it is a culture that never sought permanence in things, right? That's a whole nother culture that that wants to have everything documented. And not that the indigenous did not document, don't get me wrong, but think about the culture, right? Everything from housing to boats to how they moved around. And people say, well, what did they have? They didn't have anything. They didn't write. They didn't do this. They didn't do that. Well, they did a lot. The mound culture is very prevalent. But if you dig into the mound culture, all you're going to find is bones.
It
Right.
sounds like the differences are the difference between European lifestyles and nomadic Native American lifestyles. And so the territories are defined. I know firsthand that there are efforts currently to preserve the alphabet of the different tribes and the languages of the different tribes and the cultural experiences of the other tribes. And so
It is, absolutely. I didn't say that it didn't exist. Again, my point was just that the cultural, generally speaking, is not one that left a great number of footprint when they leave. The footprint is natural. It's to go away. It's to, it's to fade back into nature, into the environment.
but there's an effort now, even in in Washington, to reimagine what the contracts meant when the government put forward a contract either with African Americans or Native American Indians and then broke them. And they're looking for ways, or they're looking for cases that are actually showing that these contracts are even still valid today after 150, some 200 years. And tribes are making progress in that regard. And so I'm wondering, do you think there's any optimism in the possibilities that over the course of the next several decades that progress could be made in that breakdown of trust?
Absolutely. Absolutely. The contracts have always been there. People have written them, there are books about them. And so hopefully it's a great advancement in those arenas. And maybe they'll also break down the categories of race while they're at it.
When you think of race, do you think of race in terms of genetic makeup, or do you think of race in terms of species?
Yeah, I've never really thought about it in that context in terms of the way that I think about it. I think neither or. I think of race in terms of social construct.
Social contracts.
Construct.
Okay, construct. So I've had an opportunity to research the definition of race, and it appears to show that in the 15th century was when the Europeans decided that they were going to create race in a way that was biologically and culturally necessitating for race to be a particular race. Asian race, African American race, not African Americans, but Africans.
Yeah.
Skin color became an issue regarding a race. But it was all based on European efforts to try to justify their own existence. And it's been debunked that race is not about your color, your culture, or anything, because there's only one race, just the human race. And this is what the definition explained to me, and so I always get in trouble, quite honestly, because I present it in this way, and it seems like people don't want to accept that we're one race. How do you feel about that?
It's a matter of education, I think, and also government. No, I'm not going to say government. I'm going to say media drive of racial issues. So, for example, when in the categorization. So here, for example, let's talk about President the election of possibly Vice President Kamala Harris to the White House. There's been a great focus on whether she's of Indian, persuasion. Is she black? Is she Jamaican? What is she? And you ask her, she says all of the above. Whenever she gets into the crowd, I'm this, and she's in that crowd, I'm that. And so, but it's the media that's hyping that up. It's so, and people follow the media, right? And so, I think that's one example. Here's another example. When you talk about health, especially African American health or wealth, we're always categorizing to say, right, what the typical narrative is. These people are disadvantaged. These people are underserved. These people are, have more health problems than everybody else, right? That's a media categorization, typically.
So human beings are the ones who actually created all media and other terms of labeling.
It's labeling that we like to continue to perpetuate because I think, like you said, in the 1500s this was created and it's been carried forward. But if you look at cultures around the world, they're typically multicultural. You get in a room, unless you're, with specific kinds of organizations that do like racial categorization, most people will get along with every other race just fine. Do you know?
I agree with that because I think that people of color doesn't make them a race. Mm-hmm. And so I think that when we do, as you say, begin to educate mankind far enough, that perhaps that is how we break down that cultural barrier of calling one another names because it's a label and it makes one person feel better than another.
Mm-hmm. Or where you come from, right? Where you come from is another one of those
geography
barriers.
Geography is not something that's race.
No, but it drives differences.
Yeah, but
like I talked about in the beginning, I'm from the north. The south is different. But again, it's education, right? It's exposure. And I'm a big proponent of people need to travel the world because when you do that, you see people are the same all over the world. Like I said, everybody bleeds red. It's really a small world, and we have to widen our lens to really understand that it's a small world and we're really all the same.
So I'm going to plug my mom right now. So my mom always advised me as a young boy, don't ever confuse power, money, high academic skills, or travel with wisdom. And that has led me always to do my best to try to make things right.
Wonderful wisdom from her.
Anyway, this is not about me, this is about you. I want to hear so much more about you, and I don't know where to go.
I think there's a lot.
So we got a lot in here, what do you think?
326, there was a lot of great stuff. I thought I really enjoyed that.
Thank you.
You have some closing comments you'd like to make?
I don't think so.
I'd like to thank-
Well, okay, one more closing comment.
Yes, please.
One more closing comment. I'd like to speak to the wonderful, first of all, I'd like to speak to the wonderful work that the Ealey Project is doing to help to elevate the civil rights history, legacies of Jackson Ward. I would like to thank all of the people who have been present in Jackson Ward for the many years that it has been here. It was really an honor for us to have our store in Jackson Ward as a cultural mecca, really, for not only Richmond, but Virginia. And so I'd like to lift and say thank you to all the people who have worked over the years tirelessly to tell stories about W.W. Brown, for example, who is the nation's first African-American bank president, as well as Maggie Walker legacy. I was so smitten when I went to her house for the first time to learn more about people like Booker T. Washington, Marcus Garvey, and W. Du Bois, and you know, just our whole lifestyle to it connected everything to being the cornerstone of African American history in the United States. So I just want to say thank you to all the people who have lifted that. Black History Museum, for example, and my husband, who started that store back those many years to give me a in-depth community experience of Jackson, which we didn't talk about much.
Tell us more.
In-depth community experience. Well, again, all of the cultural assets that Jackson Ward has. I was exposed to Consolidated Bank, for example. It used to be Maggie Walker's bank. You know, it's going through transitions, but all the wonderful businesses that existed there, Moselle's Dry Cleaners and the barbershops that were there. The mayor of 2nd Street, Waverly Crawley, who was also a friend because our store was in his backyard, actually. We used to always say, I'm better than most, and he was a great friend and mentor at Jackson Ward. And the herb lady that used to be there, I want to lift her up because she was the plant lady for Jackson Ward at the time. So
You recall her name?
I can't remember her name, but I can tell you where her store was.
Where
It
was
right
her
on the
store?
corner. It's across the street from where, what's the store now that's Mama J's. It was across the street from Mama J's store. I want to say Miss Elizabeth, but I might be wrong. She moved over to the south side eventually.
So it's on 1st Street.
Oh yeah,
And
it's on
across the
First
street from Mama J's.
Yeah.
Right around the 400 block of 1st Street. I think Mr. Ealey had an office there also.
Oh yeah.
On the 2nd floor.
Oh, okay.
I think so.
I'd like to recognize Mr. Stallings. He was our landlord at the time.
Ron or his dad?
His dad. Yeah, we rented a couple of properties from his dad at the time. And I'd also like to lift the members of the community who were in Jackson Ward, our neighbors and our friends who patroned the store, who were not only just, you know, came to spend money, but came to spend their great energy with us. You know, people who informed us, people who protected us, people who just, you know, was happy that we were there and wanted to see us succeed. And ask me, I don't even know their names either. Today I can tell you who their faces were if you pointed out to me. But those people were very important to my experience in Jackson Ward. So I just like to lift them up.
Sounds like a loving experience.
It definitely was.
I'd like to thank you very much for taking the time to share with us today.
Thank you.
I hope that we meet your expectations and hopes because the Ealey Project, as well as the Historic Jackson Ward Association, are working diligently to reveal some of the legacy that Jackson Ward deserves and its residents deserve, as you just mentioned. So again, thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
It became a group session.
What's that?
It became a group session.
I thought she was still taping. That's
Yeah, we
really
thought we
quiet.
cut
I didn't know you were still taping.
Oh, yeah.
This is when we start talking.